So today I'm going to do a different video. This is going to be a Photoshop tutorial showing how to make this floating island with a castle on it. And for any like Gorillaz fans out there, this is kind of like their video where they had that windmill on the island floating through the clouds. That was kind of a big inspiration for this. So you only need 4 images to make this, and here they are. You can find all of these images on my website. I'll put a link down below so you could just go on there and download these images and get started. So I'm starting out in a blank Photoshop document. I have this one sized in 8.5 inches by 11 inches, so like basic print size. And these 4 images are the only 4 images we're going to need. And these can all be found on my website from the link below. A sky background, a mountain picture, like an Arizona mountain, a castle, and some birds. The birds are optional. So we'll start with the sky background. So I'll put this in. So it's already just the right size, pretty much. Stretch it out a little bit. And then we can go to the mountain. Just gonna click and drag and bring this in. So first thing we're gonna do is get rid of the background. So it's already a smart object, so first it needs to rasterize, but it'll do that all by itself. So we'll go to this tool here, which can be found under the eraser tool. So it's by default, it's just the eraser tool. You click and hold, and then click Magic Background Eraser Tool. And I have the tolerance set to 70, and basically the higher the tolerance is, the more of the background it'll erase, and the lower it is, the less of the background it'll erase. So for this image, 70 is good. So you see that little icon, that means it can't delete the background unless it's been rasterized. So just click OK, and now it can. We have the right little icon here. So I'll just zoom in so you can see the sky and the outline of the mountain. We're just going to click somewhere in the sky, and you can see it does a really good job of cutting out the sky because the tolerance is set high up to 70, so we don't get any kind of a weird outline or glowing outline. So that's why I like to have it set at 70. And so that's pretty much what we'll do for this for now. So right now I'm keeping the mountain layer selected. I'm going to push Control T. That'll bring up the transform options. And while holding Shift, I'm going to start rotating it so I can get it exactly upside down. And then click the check mark. Actually, it needs to be a little smaller. Whoa, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, I just clicked the, okay. Anyway, let's shrink it down a little bit. It's way too big. That should be good. Oh, there's this line right here that I didn't get with the background eraser tool. So I'm just going to use the lasso tool. I think that's called lasso. Polygon lasso tool. You can use any eraser tool you want. I'm just going to use this. So now we're ready to start cutting into this. But first, before I'll do that, in the mountain layer, I'm going to click and drag this to the new layer, which makes a copy of it. So we have mountain copy and mountain. I'm going to take mountain copy and rename it mountain background. And I'm going to make it invisible for now. And we're going to go back to that later. So we're going to focus on the mountain layer right now. So I'm going to zoom into this. And basically, since it's upside down, all of these hills become valleys, and all the valleys become hills, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go to the pen tool. Pen tool is kind of weird if you're not familiar with it. A lot of Adobe products and other products use it. This isn't really a tutorial on it, but I'll kind of explain it a little bit. So with the pen tool selected, I'm going to just kind of cut around this and try and make it look more organic than that straight line up there. So I'll start right here, just making one point, and I'll make another point by clicking and dragging, and you get these handles you can kind of work with. So, and you can move each handle independently by holding Alt. So I'm going to just kind of vaguely follow some of the hills and valleys that are in the image. Doesn't have to be too perfect. Actually, I'm going to undo that one. Doesn't have to be too perfect, and go back and carve into them a little bit later. So you can see I'm kind of following. Each valley becomes a hill, each hill becomes a valley, but it doesn't have to be exact. And this section over here, we're not going to really need that. So I'm just going to start moving it down and cutting it off here. So that's the hard part. It's over. So now I'm just going to go around the mountain here. Now we have our selection, our basic selection. And so I'm going to click paths right here. That's the same miniature version of the same path we just worked with. It's kind of hard to see because it's so small, but that's what it looks like. So now we have that. We're going to go down to this load path as a selection. And that just makes those normal dancing ants things. So I'm going to do select inverse, or you can do Control-Shift-I. So that selects everything outside of the area we selected, because that's what we want to get rid of, not the stuff we selected. The stuff we select is what we want to keep. So just hit delete. And that's basically the right shape we want. It's a little bit high on this side, a little bit low on this side. It's a little bit like unbalanced. I feel like it's balanced a little bit far to the right, like it's right heavy. So easy way to fix that is to go to Edit, Transform, Warp. And that's just a really good tool to just kind of manipulate. It kind of makes this grid with handles on it, and you could do a lot of crazy stuff with it, but I'm just subtly kind of shift the weight more to the left just to kind of make it look more balanced, I guess, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's the basic shape that we want. So now I'm going to go back to the layers panel. I'm going to turn off the mountain we just made. I'm going to go to this background mountain layer. So basically the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to make one layer in the foreground and one layer in the background, and there's going to be the castle in between. So it'll make more sense once I bring the castle in, but just take my word for it. It's going to look cool. So we're going to basically do kind of the same thing that we did before. We're going to cut through it with the pen tool, vaguely following the shapes here. It can't be exactly the same. That's why I'm not just copying the layer. It has to show some differences between the foreground and the background. And the differences in, oops. So now that I went through all of here, I can just kind of cut through this here. And again, go to path, make selection, inverse, delete. So now we're just focusing on this top part. That's why I just cut off the bottom part. So now if we bring back the foreground and the background at the same time, you can see this is in front and this is behind. And we're going to go back to the transform warp tool to make this look better. So I'm going to tuck it in kind of on the side back here. It's a little extreme. And kind of pull it up a little bit so that it all kind of just flows together. It's very hard to tell that they're separate layers right now, but I'm going to add the castle in and then it'll be more apparent. But basically you can see this is the foreground, this is the background. They're separate layers. They look a little bit weird right there. I think I'm actually going to change that a little bit, but that'll be behind the castle, so that's not important. So speaking of the castle so much, let's bring in the castle. I'm going to put this on top of everything just so we can see it. So again, we're going to go to the background eraser tool. Of course, it has to rasterize because it's a smart object. So we really want to pay close attention to the outlines. We don't want it to cut too much off, but we don't want it to leave too much. So it's still at 70 from before. Let's just see how that looks. I think that works pretty good. I'm actually turn off the mountain layers because it's distracting me. So that looks pretty good. The outlines around here is what I'm really paying attention to, these parapets or whatever they're called. So I'm going to go back into the pen tool and I'm going to cut around this tree and around underneath the bottom of it, so it just isolates the castle without any of that landscaping around it. So this is going to take a little bit of time because we can't use the quick selection tool down here or the magic background eraser tool or anything like that. So this is kind of a chance for you to see how to use the pen tool for kind of a more detailed work. And right now I'm just mostly just clicking a bunch of little points around. I'm not really using the curves as much on it because there aren't very many curves on this structure. And this back here, this is actually a different building, so I'm just going to cut it right off. And Just going around here. Around the bottom is easy. And a lot of this bottom part will be obscured by some of the hills of the mountain layer that we made. It's kind of hard to tell where the tree ends and the castle begins, but okay, that's the hard part is over. And now, just select all up here. I gotta find back where I went at the beginning to close this big giant loop. All right, now back into paths. You got our selection path. Make the selection. Control-Shift-I to inverse. Delete the background, and that's basically all it is to isolating the castle from the background. So now we're going to turn back the mountain layers back on, and I got the castle. I'm going to put it behind the mountain layer, but in front of the mountain background layer, like that. And now you can kind of see the value of having these two separate mountain layers. I'm going to make the castle a little bit smaller and move it up. A little bit smaller. So you can see the castle's in front of the background, but behind the foreground. So that's the whole reason I made those two separate layers, is so that I could achieve this effect. And some of the edges are a little bit sharp. We can go through and feather them a little bit later on. I'm just kind of going through the basic structure of it right now. I'm just gonna make the castle a little bit bigger. So when I'm positioning the castle, I'm kind of thinking about the balance between like this top part here and the bottom part of the mountain. So I want it to be kind of like a balance between this bottom part of the mountain jutting out down here and then this top part of the castle jutting up here. So I want it to feel kind of balanced. So like almost like the whole thing's a big diamond shape. It looks like I'm gonna have to move the whole thing down a little bit because the castle's getting cut off at the top. So I'll just click the mountain, hold Shift to select the castle, the mountain, and the background. Using the move tool, just moving them all down. And I actually want to move the castle, just kind of scooch it over a little like that. Maybe down a little bit because that part, I don't like that. Okay, that looks pretty good. And here's what I was talking about, how you can clearly tell this line right here. I'm not really feeling that. It's like you can clearly tell where the foreground ends and the background begins, and I don't really like that. So I'm gonna go to the eraser tool. Eraser tool is actually a really good tool. Like, people think it's like unsophisticated to use the eraser tool. No, it's a good tool. So I just have it set to 30 size, 0 hardness, and I'm gonna zoom in real close so I can feather this out. It's gonna be kind of hard to see, but it's just getting rid of that sharp edge and blending everything a lot better. So the foreground just kind of blends in with the background. And obviously we're going to have a sharp line where the castle is. But then again on this side, you can just feather it out again. Because it wouldn't look right if I, like, for example, if I feathered it out right here, that doesn't look right. It should be a hard line where the mountains, where the hills end and the stone wall begins. So that's like the basic structure of this project. So everything else I'm going to do is just going to be making it look pretty. Just centering it a little bit more. So this doesn't look very realistic. It just looks like I just pasted a mountain in front of a background. So when you have a big object in front of like a very foggy sky background, you're going to have some fog that's like in front of it too. So the way I want to achieve that effect is actually very simple. I'm going to go to the sky layer and click and drag it to the new layer option. Then I want to bring it up to the top so it's in front of everything. I'm going to rename it fog. And then I'm going to go to blending mode. Blending mode is a really powerful tool in Photoshop. You can do a lot of cool effects with it. And I'm going to do, what am I going to do? Lighter cut? Yeah, lighter color. That's what I wanted. So you can see that's a little bit too extreme. It looks like you could barely see any of it. But what you do is you turn down the opacity a little bit, maybe down to like 75%, and then go to the eraser tool, because like that's still a little bit too hidden. The eraser tool, I'm going to make the eraser tool bigger up to like maybe like 176 or whatever. And obviously this has to be rasterized because of that stupid smart object thing. And I'm just going to kind of go through and erase parts of it. Actually, I might even want the eraser to be bigger. So another cool tool with the eraser, you can change the opacity of it. So that basically is how much, like what the opacity will be after you erase it. So normally it's at 100, so it's 100% erased and visible. I'm gonna turn it down to like 74. So this just kind of shows some key features of it, like the castle itself and the ground around the castle. But then other parts I'm like deliberately leaving more obscured. Like down here, this part I'm leaving it more hidden. But then like the castle, I want it to be more focused and kind of showing a little bit better. So just as like it looks a little bit better that way, it looks like it's partially in the clouds, partially obscured by the clouds, whereas before that just looks like not realistic at all. But this just kind of gives a little bit more of an element of realism, if that makes sense. So now I'm going to, let's put some birds in. Why not? So I'm just going to go to this bird's image, make it bigger. I'm going to try and use the magic background eraser again. Got to rasterize it. That actually worked really good at 70% tolerance. Like like you can tell the feathers are all good on it. There's no weird backgrounds. So I'll move them, kind of position them a little bit differently. I don't really want the birds in front of the castle right here, so I'm just using the rectangular marquee tool to select these birds and moving them over here. And maybe I'll select some of these, move them over here. I don't really like that one. This one, I'll move you over there. Yeah. And another thing, now that I have the bird selected, I'm going to move them underneath the fog layer so that it looks like they're flying through the clouds. Because before, it didn't really look good. But now it's like they're flying through the clouds. They're obscured by the clouds a little bit. Maybe I'll even turn the opacity down on the clouds a little bit. Maybe like 60. Okay. So now I'm going to change the color correction a little bit because it looks kind of green, kind of drab, kind of boring. So I'm going to go to adjustments, curves. Curves is my favorite color correction tool. And when you make an adjustment layer, a new adjustment layer, it's good because it's what's called non-destructive editing, meaning you can adjust the curves on it, but you can later go back and change them again if you don't like them, or you can get rid of them entirely. Whereas if you just go to like image adjustments curves, that is destructive editing. I mean, you can't go back and change it later and change your mind. So I like the curves color correction tool, and I like to make it an adjustment layer. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of make it have a little bit more contrast, just to kind of make the colors kind of pop out a little bit more. Then I want to click on this. So the way curves works is like when it is RGB, that means it's changing the red, green, and blue all at the same time. So it's going to be your brightness and contrast. When you click on this, you can change the red, the green, or the blue independently. So I'm going to go to red, and then you see you have a red line here. I'm going to turn it down. It's very subtly. Then I'm going to the blue, and I'm going to turn it up a little bit, not too much. Just because I want it to have kind of like a cold, kind of a dark, gloomy kind of a look to it. And then green, I'm not sure I really need to do much to the green. If you turn down green, it turns purple. If you turn up green, it obviously turns green. So I don't think I really want to mess with the green that much. I might want to bring up the contrast a little bit. Maybe a little bit more blue even. Not too much. The red. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So now we can close this panel out. So just as like a before and after, this is with the curves, this is without the curves. So it's a big difference. It looks really drab. It almost looks sepia tone, like one of those old-fashioned movies, like the beginning of The Wizard of Oz or something. And this, it just looks more cinematic, I guess. The high contrast, the dark, kind of a moody feeling to it. So the last thing, well, one of the last things I'm going to do, just to kind of give it a little bit of more of a moody effect, is I'm going to go to New Layer, and I'm going to go to the paint buckets and make it black. And this is kind of like a vignette effect, I guess you could call it. It's going to be like darkened around the edges. So on the eraser tool, I have the eraser as a giant eraser, and the hardness is at 0, so it's going to be a very feathered effect. So I'm just going right to the center and just clicking once. Oh, it's still at 50% or 74% opacity. I'm going to turn it back up to 100%. And just click in the center a few times. So that just leaves like a darkened effect on the edges, like the very corners. So you can see like a before and after. This is without it, and this is with it. It just kind of makes it a dark, kind of a gloomy effect. You kind of see this like Instagram pictures a lot, but I think it looks good in this context. I guess we can add some typography too. I'm going to move the castle and the mountain up a little bit just to make room. I'm going to put some typography underneath, like a heading underneath. So make it a little bit smaller and move it up just to leave room for the text. I don't want the birds to be in front of it. I don't think they are. That looks good. So I'm going to go to fonts right here. So I'm going to use this font. So you can find it right here. It's just one of the default fonts that comes with it. And so I'm going to put some type that says Kingdom of the Clouds. It's obviously way too big, but I can change that. I like to use the transform tool for text just so I can see exactly what I want it to be. So Kingdom of the Clouds. So obviously that's not gonna do because we can barely even read the text. What it needs is a, I'm gonna put in front of the clouds too. What it needs is a drop shadow, so we can actually determine where the text ends and the clouds begin. Because like it's okay here, but over here you can't read that at all. It's terrible. So I'm going to layer style, drop shadow. So this, when used right, this is actually a really good tool. You don't want it to be too extreme though, because like if it's like that, it's just ridiculous. So just barely any of a distance at all. I'll turn up the spread just a little bit, and the size. The size is like how blurry it is. The spread is like how thick it is. So I just want it to be just big enough so that you can make out the difference. They can make out the letters, but not too obvious at the same time. So I'll turn the spread up, size up a little bit, and I think that's pretty good. And this is the opacity. This is like how transparent it is. So I'm going to leave that fairly high. And I'm going to move it down just a little bit because it's kind of obscuring the bottom of this. That looks pretty good. I think that the vignette is kind of darkening the text too much on the bottom. So what I'm going to do with the vignette layer selected, I'm going to go Control T to go to transform and just stretch it out a little bit. So you can see how when I stretch it out, it affects the text a lot more than it affects anything else. Because the text is on the bottom and you need to really be able to see that. Maybe even a little bit more. Oops. Okay. Just gonna move the text down a little bit. I think I can move the mountain and the castle down a little bit more too, just to have it centered a little bit better. And yeah, adjust the bird because now that bird's in front of the castle. But anyway, that's pretty much it. This is pretty much the effect I was going for. So that's all there is to it. It's actually pretty simple when you break it all down. So again, you can go to my website to download the 4 images you need for this project so you can follow along with the tutorial. And while you're on my website, there's other tutorials, like article tutorials I have 2 After Effects animation tutorials. I have a few web development HTML and CSS tutorials on there. And there's a lot of content on my website that isn't available on YouTube, like animations that aren't on YouTube, drawings and sculptures and artwork and stuff like that. So if you're into that kind of thing, you can check it out. So yeah, thanks for watching.